What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Stamina Sorcerers. Stamina Sorc is still probably down there with Stamina Templars in terms of the DPS class, that's Stamina DPS class I should say, that is pulling probably the least amount of DPS overall compared to the current 5 classes in the game. And that's just it's just due to the nature that the other classes have a little bit stronger tool sets, they have stronger tool tips. It's also kind of the fact that Stamina Sorcs don't really have a class spam build that's particularly strong. They don't really have an execute ability, and so Stamina Sorcs, very similar to Stamplars, are kind of falling behind, they're lagging behind a little bit, especially compared to the Stamina Nightblade and the Stamina Warden. That being said though, Stamina Sorcs definitely have one of the best AoE moves in the game with Hurricane, and they also have a lot of survivability as well. Their overall resistances compared to other Stamina DPS is generally going to be a lot higher on average. So Stamina Sorcs are pretty beefy overall in terms of their survivability, but in terms of just raw DPS, they are unfortunately outmatched by Stamina Nightblades and Stamina Wardens in sort of that just raw DPS potential. So like the rest of our builds, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build yourself. And we'll be talking about a couple of gear substitutions that you might want to make depending on whether or not you have access to certain DLCs or certain expansions. So we'll be discussing that a little bit when we go over our gear. Talking a little bit about our rotation, so that way you guys can get an idea of how it all works and kind of what we're doing with our rotation. Stamina Sorcs have a little bit of a weird rotation here, mainly because of the fact that we need to use Dark Deal to sustain, which does have a cast timer associated with it. So if we do want to use something like Advanced Yokeda, we kind of have to make a little bit of adjustments to the rotation to kind of make sure we're not dropping Advanced Yokeda at all. So we'll talk about our rotation, and then we'll do a 6-man dummy parse, so you guys can get an idea of the amount of DPS you are able to pull with this build here. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first with our gear. So for our gear, Monster Helm set is still going to be Velidreth's. None of the 2 Monster Helm sets that were introduced in Wrathstone were really DPS oriented sets, they were more support oriented sets, so Velidreth is still the Monster Helm set of choice here. Weapon damage is very strong, but the 2-piece is really what makes Velidreth shine. So a lot of bosses have very large hitboxes, and so even though Velidreth spawns 3 disease spores, you can actually get all 3 to hit a boss in certain scenarios, depending on how you're positioned and whether or not the spores manage to hit the boss's hitbox or not. So Velidreth does have the potential to do a lot of DPS all at once. This is a DLC Monster Helm set though, so you do need to complete Cradle of Shadows in order to get Velidreth, so you do need to have access to the Shadows of the Hiss DLC. So if you can't complete that, or if you don't have access to DLC, then you do have 2 other options for Monster Helm sets. The first one is going to be Celine. This is a base game set that you can get from Celine's web. The max stamina is not quite as strong as the weapon damage from Velidreth, and the 2-piece, whenever you deal direct melee damage, it is a stronger hit overall, but however it only hits 1 person. So unlike Velidreth, where you have 3 disease spores and in theory you can hit the same monster up to 3 times, or you can hit 3 different monsters, Celine's only ever hits 1 monster at a time. So combine that with the max stamina not being quite as strong as the weapon damage bonus, and Celine's does end up being a little bit weaker overall compared to Velidreth here. Another option that you might want to consider taking, I don't believe I have it here, it's going to be Stormfist. So this is another base game set. You can get this from Tempest Island. So the 1-piece adds stamina regen, which is really nice to have here. Stamina Sorcs, very similar to their Magicka counterparts, do have a little bit of issues with sustaining just because of their very high drain per second. So having that additional stamina regen does help out here with your overall DPS. Now, with the loss of the Implosion Passive, so the Implosion Passive was changed in Wrathstone to Amplitude, the Stormfist proc itself does not have a chance to proc Implosion because it doesn't exist anymore. That being said, the Stormfist proc itself is still fairly decently strong and deals about the same amount of DPS as Celine's does, the overall damage. Just on a longer duration there. And plus it can also help proc concussed as well, and it does, unlike Celine's, does have a bit of an AoE component behind it as well. It does deal damage within 4 meters. The main issue with Stormfist is that when it procs, it pretty much stays in place, so if your boss happens to move out of that Stormfist, then you're basically losing damage on that proc itself. So it's not very good for more mobile fights. For more mobile fights, you might want to stick with Velidreth's or Celine's, because at the very least Celine's, you wouldn't be within melee range in most instances. You either be chasing the boss down or something like that, so you would be able to hit them with Celine's that way. So that's your Monster Helm set. So for our body set, so this is the set that you want to maintain on your body at all times. We have Relequen. Relequen is still the strongest set in the game for stamina DPS right now. This is dropped from Cloudrest, so you do need to have access to the Somerset expansion in order to get this set here. I had the perfect version here. The perfect version is dropped from Vet Cloudrest +1, 2, and 3 for the armor pieces, so you need the armor from +1 and jewelry comes from +2 or +3. If you can't complete Vet Cloudrest +1 or above, you can form the imperfect version from normal Cloudrest. The main difference between the two of them is that just that max stamina bonus on that 5-piece, which doesn't really add all too much DPS as a stamina DPS. It's adding maybe half a percentage point, maybe 1 percentage point at most in terms of difference in DPS there. So this is your first set. Your second set is going to be Advancing Yokeda. So this is a heavy armor set that you can get from Hellra Citadel. So this is a base game set. However, in order to make the best use out of Advancing Yokeda, you will need to transmute the jewelry because it is a heavy armor set, so the jewelry comes in healthy rather than something like robust. So you do need to have access to the Somerset expansion if you want to make use of Advancing Yokeda in order to be able to transmute your jewelry into either Bloodthirty or Infused. More on that in a little bit there. This is going to be our front bar set. We have 2 daggers on the front bar here, and we are still running the Maelstrom Bow on the back bar here. Now, in terms of other sets you might want to run, there are quite a few sets that you could choose instead as a Stamp Sorc. First set is going to be, where is it? Briarheart. So Briarheart is a drop set from Hrothgar, so you can farm this if you have access to the Hrothgar DLC. But because it is a drop set, you can buy this off of guild traders if you don't have access to the Hrothgar DLC itself. So this can be used either on the body or on the front bar set. So the front bar set, typically speaking, are going to be proc sets. The Briarheart is a proc set, so the effect will carry over to your back bar. So this just helps improve your weapon damage. It also gives you a nice heal whenever you deal a critical hit. So it's a pretty nice for additional survivability as well. The overall weapon damage on average is going to be a little bit higher than Hunding's because the proc will carry over to your back bar if you are using this as a back bar set. If you are using this as a body set though, Hunding's will do a little bit better compared to Briarheart there, and I'll talk about Hunding's in a little bit there. Other options for sets here. Apologize while I'm trying to search for all of them. Leviathan is a medium armor set that is dropped from Crypt of Hearts. So this is a dungeon set, so you will need to farm it, but it is a base game set. Crypt of Hearts 1 is a pretty easy dungeon to complete here. So this is basically the stamina version of Mother's Sorrow, so it just gives you a lot of weapon crit. Now the 5-piece, because it is a static bonus, you do want to wear Leviathan as a body set. You don't really want to wear it as a front bar set because the bonus will not carry over to your back bar. So this is a good set to kind of tide you over while you're farming for Relequen, for example. A few more sets here, if I can find them. Where is it? Strength of the Automaton is a set that has good synergy with Stamina Sorcerers, mainly because a lot of your damage is going to be physical damage. The only source of non-physical damage that you'll be dealing as a Stamp Sorc is going to be from Poison Injection and your alchemical poisons. So this is a drop set from Darkshade Caverns, so very similar to Leviathan. You do need to farm this, but it is a base game set, and Darkshade Caverns 1 is a pretty easy dungeon to complete here. So very similar to Leviathan, because the 5-piece is a static bonus, you want to wear this as your body set. One other set here that you're going to want to consider running, let me see if I can find it, here it is, Deadly Strike. So this is a older set, this is a PvP set that's not dropped from Wars of the Worthy, so you do need to go up to Bruma in order to basically RNG box your way through the set. So each box costs 12k AP, and it has a chance to drop any of the Deadly Strike set pieces here. So this is a updated set, I should say, not necessarily a new set. So this set has been in the game for a while, but they did update it in Wrathstone to make it a little bit more viable here. So the 5-piece increases the damage of your physical, bleed, poison, and disease damage over time abilities that you do by 14%. So a lot of your abilities here are going to be considered damage over time. So Rending Slashes, Hurricane, all of your back bar dots, Endless Hail, Caltrops, Poison Injection, those all count as those will all be affected by Deadly Strike here. So Deadly Strike, the 5-piece is a static bonus, so ideally you're going to be wearing this as a body set, but you can wear this as a front bar set as well. While you're on your back bar, you will not be getting that 14% initial damage, but once you swap over to your front bar, you will be getting that additional 14% damage again, even from on your back bar dots. So you can run Deadly Strike as a front bar set if you so desire. Two other options that I'm going to want to discuss here. These are going to be crafted sets here. So the first one, let me see if I can find it, going to be, where is it? Hunding's Rage. So this is a base game set that is a crafted set. You do need to know 6 traits if you want to craft this yourself. You can find this in the last zone for each of the 3 different alliances. So Pretty easy set to obtain. It's a craftable set. Sure, you need to know 6 traits, but it's not that hard to either find somebody to craft it for you if you don't know the traits, or you can just find it off of Guild Traders and buy it off Guild Traders here. So like Leviathan and Automaton, Hunting's Rage, the 5-piece is a static bonus, so you will need to wear this on the body. You don't really want to wear this at the front bar set because you will end up losing that bonus when you swap to your back bar there. The other set that you might want to consider running is going to be Mechanical Acuity. This is another crafted set from the Clockwork City DLC, so you can either craft it yourself, or you can pay somebody to craft it for you, or you can buy it off of Guild Traders. So very similar to Hunting's Rage, this is a crafted set that requires 6 traits in order to craft it yourself. So the 5-piece basically gives you 100% crit chance for 5 seconds every 18 seconds. So pretty nice to have. It will give you less crit overall compared to something like Advancing Yokeda, but it is a nice set to kind of tide you over while you're farming for Advancing Yokeda. And it is a crafted set, and it is a proc set, so you're able to wear this on the front bar as well as your body. So pretty nice flexibility there with Mechanical Acuity. So in terms of armor traits, enchants, jewelry traits, and enchants, everything like that. So we are going all the vines with all max stamina enchants here, and we are going with 7 medium pieces to max out our weapon crit chance. For our jewelry, we are going with Bloodthirty with weapon damage enchants. You can go with Infused instead as your jewelry trait of choice. Bloodthirty is going to be a little bit weaker on Stam Sorks compared to like on a Stamina Nightblade, just because you don't really have an execute. Your only real execute damage is going to be coming from the dual wield passive. So Bloodthirty is going to be still going to be stronger than Infused on average, but for some fights you might want to consider running Infused instead. So really any combination of Bloodthirty and Infused is a good option for jewelry traits. Now, we are going with double daggers here on the front bar. For enchants, doesn't really matter because we are going to be using alchemical poisons. For traits, though, you can go with nirn on the main hand or sharpened on the main hand and then sharpened on the offhand here. We are going to be using the Shadow Mundus, so we will be losing some penetration by not using the lover, so we do want to make up that penetration by running at least one sharpened piece. So I will show you guys 3 different CP setups depending on whether you're running the lover, the shadow, and depending on whether you're running 1 sharpened or 2 sharpened with the shadow there. Now, I mentioned that we're not really going to be worried too much about enchants. That's because we are using alchemical poisons. So now they have fixed a bug, if it was a bug, where alchemical poisons were not stacking on each other. So now everybody will have their own unique alchemical poison debuff. So basically that means they can't stack on each other. So now alchemical poisons are going to be the best option for your front bar. So your enchants don't matter because poisons do override your weapon enchants. For your back bar, though, for the Maelstrom Bow, we're still going with an Infused with the weapon damage enchant, though. We still want to have that Berserker enchant going in order to give us more weapon damage here. So that's pretty much it for all of the gear stuff. So let's go over our character sheet. So I am an Orc. Orcs are going to be the strongest race in terms of raw DPS potential. They get 2,000 max stamina and 258 additional weapon damage. They also have a nice bonus of 1,000 max health, so that gives them a little bit of additional survivability, which pairs very nicely with the Sorcs' innate survivability from their class abilities and things like that. If you don't want to be an Orc, though, you do have several other racial options. So the next strongest race is going to be the Dunmer. They get 1875 max stamina and 258 weapon damage. Dark Elves also get 1875 max magicka and 258 spell damage as well. So if for whatever reason you want to flip-flop between Magicka Sorcerer and Stamina Sorcerer, the Dark Elves are a nice race to kind of get you that sort of hybrid stat bonuses. From there, you also have the Khajiits. They get 10% additional crit damage and crit healing done. They get 825 max health, stamina, and magicka, and they get 85 health, They get 85 magicka and stamina regen, and a 100 additional health regen. They get a little bit of max stats, they get a little bit of additional sustain, which is very helpful because Stam Sorcs don't really have very good sustain to begin with. And they get 10% additional crit damage, which gives you a nice buff to your damage overall. It's not quite as strong as 258 weapon damage from the Orcs or the Dunmer, but it is still a damage boost. 2 other races that you might want to consider are going to be Red Guards and Bosmers. So both of these 2 races get 2,000 max stamina, but they, instead of getting additional weapon damage or any sort of additional damage boost, they get sustain bonuses instead. So the Bosmer, the Wood Elves, they get 258 additional stamina regen. And then red guards get the Adrenaline Rush passive, which gives you 950 additional stamina return whenever you deal any sort of direct damage every 5 seconds. So those two classes have the highest amount of regen, but they do end up losing in terms of raw DPS potential because they don't have any sort of additional damage bonus. They don't have weapon damage, they don't have additional crit damage like the Khajiits do. But those are your kind of your options for races there. For attributes, all points into stamina here. We want to maximize the DPS after all. You can shift a few points into health if you want to improve your survivability. As an orc, you don't really need to do that, but maybe as a Dunmer or as a Red Guard or a Bosmer, you might want to put a few points into health there. I personally would not put any more points, any more than 10 points into health there, because at that point you're kind of giving up a little bit too much damage in return for survivability. Damage is still going to be your primary motive here, and it's better off to kind of learn what's killing you, you know, whether that's mechanics or something like that, and rather than just sort of pumping more points into health that way. For our Mundstone, we are going with the Shadow here for additional crit damage. You can go with the Lover instead for the additional penetration bonus. In that instance, you will not be running a sharpened trait at all. You'd be running Nirn honed with either with Precise if you're using alchemical poisons, or if you want to run Enchants, then you would be running Infused instead. But Nirn Precise with the alchemical poisons is going to be the strongest if you're going to be running the Lover instead. I am a werewolf. You don't have to be a werewolf. I was just testing out a werewolf build on a Stamsork earlier, so that's why I'm a werewolf here. If you want some additional regen, you can be a vampire instead, because vampires do get 10% additional stamina regen when they're stage 2. So that's an option there for you there. And then for food, just for the purposes of the parse, we are going to be running Lava Foot. So this basically helps simulate orbs and blue food. You get a little bit less max stam with blue compared to using blue food, but the stamina regen is very close to what you would expect to see if you were running orbs. So that's just for the purposes of the parse. For the actual raid, you'll be running something like Dubious Comoran Throne or Artaeum Takeaway Broth. So those two foods give you max health, max stamina, and stamina regen. They are going to be, admittedly, a little bit weaker, so you don't get quite as much max stamina compared to blue food, you don't get quite as much health compared to blue food, but you do get the additional regen, which is very important for a stamina sork because you don't really have very good regen to begin with. Your drain is actually pretty high, so you do want to run either Dubious Comoran Throne or Artaeum Takeaway Broth when you're in an actual raid. But for the parse, we are going to be running Lava Foot here. Now going over our skills, you have Rending Slashes, Shrouded Daggers, Dark Deal, Rearming Trap, Bound Armaments, and Flawless Dawnbreaker. We're not going to be using Flawless Dawnbreaker too much. This is just for the weapon damage bonus that we get from both the ability itself as well as the passive from the fighter skill line here. Now notice that I am going to be using Shrouded Dagger as a spamble. There are some builds out there that are using Rending Slashes as a spamble, which is perfectly fine to do. It is a little bit easier to sustain Rending Slashes rotation. However, I prefer using Shrouded Daggers because Shrouded Daggers does give you a little bit of additional cleave damage, so that's just nice to have, especially in trash pulls. But if you want to go pure raw single target DPS, then you can run Rending Slashes instead and just have Hurricane here instead of Shrouded Daggers. Now for our back bar, pretty cut and dry, your standard stamina setup here. Raise a Caltrops, Poison Injection, Endless Hail. We have Hurricane here on the back bar, and we have Bound Armaments again for the additional max stam, and we have the Greater Storm Atronach. So this is going to be our primary ultimate of choice here. You can use Ballista, which is the bow ultimates, the bow weapon line ultimate here, but Storm Atronach deals just as much DPS, plus it also grants one of your allies Major Berserk, which is pretty important if you want to sort of maximize your DPS. So I would recommend running Greater Storm Atronach rather than Ballista, just for that Major Berserk bonus that you might give to another player. Now, I am running Dark Deal on the front bar because I am running Advanced Yokeda on the front bar. If you're running something like Deadly Strike, Briarheart, Advanced Mechanical Acuity on the front bar, you can flip-flop where Hurricane is. So you can put Dark Deal here on the back bar and put Hurricane to the front bar here, and if you're not using Shrouded Dagger, then you can just run any sort of Sork ability or any sort of fighter skilled ability in place of this just for the additional weapon damage bonus. But if you are running Advancing Yokeda, because Dark Deal does have a cast time associated with it, you don't want to be on your back bar for very long. You want to basically minimize the time on your back bar to maintain your Advanced Yokeda uptime. So you have Dark Deal up here on the front bar instead. And I'll go over this in the rotation, but you will be doing a more dynamic rotation this way. Now going over our champion points, the CP cap has not changed between Wrathstone and Murkmire. So the CP cap is still 810, which gives us 270 points to put across each of our three different constellation colors. Starting off with our green CPs, We have 75 into Mooncalf and 75 into Tenacity, which gives us 120 points to put into the remaining nodes however we'd feel like. So I personally have 40 Shadow Ward, 40 Tumbling, and 40 Warlord, but sometimes I'll switch it around depending on what trial we're running. If you want, you can push Mooncalf up to 100 and Tenacity up to 100, so that way you kind of squeeze out that last 1% from both of these nodes. That'll give you 70 points instead to play around with rather than the 120. For our blue CPs, I have 40 into Master at Arms, 61 into Thaumaturge, 56 into Precise Strikes, 64 into Piercing, and 49 into Mighty. So this is assuming that you're running the Shadow Mundus with one Sharpened Dagger. Now if you're running 2 Sharpened Daggers, you gain additional 1376 additional penetration. You can drop Piercing down by 1376, so you drop this down to about 3000 or so. So you basically drop this down to roughly 36 or so piercing, and then you can add in points elsewhere. So you can push, for example, Mighty up to 64, you can push Precise Strikes up to 61, and you can push Master at Arms up to 48. This is one configuration that you might want to consider using if you have 2 Sharpened Daggers running the Shadow. Now if you're running the Lover, you get 4196 penetration from the Lover, so you can basically drop Piercing all the way down to like 25 or so. That just helps to account a little bit for uptimes and things. And you can push Precise Strikes and Thaumaturge up to 66 instead. 26 in the Piercing here. So this is kind of what you can do instead if you're running the Lover instead of the Shadow with no Piercing as your traits. Finally, for our red CPs, this particular setup that I have is kind of a one-size-fits-most approach, so this will give me good mitigation across all the different pieces of content that I might want to run, but it does not necessarily maximize mitigation across any single piece of content. So in those instances, you still want to shift some red CP points around in order to maximize your mitigation. I have 81 into Ironclad, 61 into Thick-Skinned, and 64 into both Hardy and Elemental Defender. I've activated without... Oh, I did not. Okay. Oh, it's because distributing. Okay, there we go. So let's go ahead and talk about our rotation itself. So like I mentioned earlier, Stamsorks, if you are running Advanced Yokeda on the front bar, you do have a little bit of a weird rotation because you do need to do a dynamic rotation because now you have 4 global cooldowns on your back bar. You have Endless Hail, Caltrops, Poison Injection, Hurricane, and you also have the potential for a 5th global cooldown with the Greater Storm Atronach ultimate there. So again, I mentioned earlier that we moved Dark Deal to the front bar because it has a cast time associated with it, so if we were using it, we're actually giving up 2 global cooldowns instead of the 1 global cooldown instead. So that's 1 for the cast, and then 1 for the additional cast time itself. That's why we have Dark Deal on the front bar here. So if you are running Advanced Yokeda, you will be running a dynamic rotation because you basically want to use at most 3 abilities on your back bar, and then go back to your front bar to basically refresh the Advanced Yokeda buff. So for advancing Yokeda front bar rotation, it's going to be very dynamic. So you always want to start off with the Rearming Trap. Just starting off, you can start off with all of your dots running. You can see here that it did swap to the back bar to re-up Hurricane, but I don't re-up it here. So when Hurricane runs out again, I'm going to go back to my back bar and re-up it like so. So that way I keep myself to those 3 global cooldowns that way. Now you can see here that the duration of Hurricane is going to end up kind of overlap with the other 3 primary dots, in which case you want to go to your front bar and then re-up it as soon as you can. You don't want to use 4 global cooldowns because you're cutting it very close there to basically you might end up losing your Advanced Yokeda bonus there. So that's kind of the idea behind running an Advanced Yokeda front bar rotation. You just kind of want to make sure that you're always using 3 global cooldowns on the back bar. Now, let's say your ultimate is up and you just started your back bar rotation, so in the middle of the back bar rotation, your ultimate goes up. You still want to go to your front bar, just do 1 light attack, do Rending Slashes, then go back to your back bar, use your ultimate, and then go back to your front bar. So an example of that would look something like this. And then you would just go back to your front bar rotation like so. Now, I didn't do any heavy attack, so this was 3 million dummy parts. Now, it wasn't really kind of showcasing the actual rotation itself, but because Stem Sorks don't have very good kind of sort of regen, you still want to do a heavy attack every time you cast Dark Deal. So, here, I'll show you guys what I mean here. So, we're just going to start off our rotation here. So, we cast Dark Deal. So before we cast Dark Deal again, I do want to do one heavy attack self-marking. Where you do that heavy attack is kind of up to you. So for example, I'll do a heavy attack here, and then go back to my back bar, do my back bar rotation here, and recast Dark Deal. So basically you want to try to fit in at least one heavy attack between each Dark Deal, otherwise you will not be able to fully sustain a light attack rotation. So you do need to do a few heavy attacks here and there in order to kind of sustain your rotation here. So example, heavy attack again here. Again, we want to minimize our back bar uptime. Even though I could have casted Hurricane on the back bar, I did not because I wanted to minimize my time on my back bar in order to maximize my Yokeda uptime there. Gonna kill it there. Alright, so that is kind of the idea behind the rotation. Now, if you're not running Advanced Yokeda on your front bar, so you're running Advanced Yokeda, you're not running Advanced Yokeda, or you're running Briarheart, then, like I mentioned earlier, you can shift Dark Deal to the, shift Dark Deal to the back bar, and shift Hurricane to the front bar here. And then you can do a little bit more of a static rotation this way. You don't have to necessarily worry about being on your back bar for too long if you're not running Advanced Yokeda. And then again, if you are running Rending Slashes as a spam build rather than Shrouded Daggers, you just replace Shrouded Daggers with a Fighter's Guild ability for that 3% additional weapon damage here. But we are going to be using Advanced Yokeda, so we are going to swap around where these abilities are. Now we're going to go ahead and do a 6-man dummy par so you guys can get an idea of the amount of DPS that we're able to pull here. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that Stem Sorks do not have a source of Major Fracture, Minor Fracture, or Minor Berserk. So if you want to compare this parts to Stamina Nightblades, Stamina Wardens, or Stamina Templars, just bear that in mind that you will need to adjust your parses accordingly to kind of account for the additional penetration, the Minor Berserk from those parses there. So if you want to take a true comparison, you are going to want to take a look at raid buffed parses rather than solo self-buffed parses like I have here. Now, let's go ahead and get started here with our rotation. So again, we are doing a dynamic rotation. We want to minimize the time on our back bar here, so I'm not going to be re-upping Hurricane until I need to. Still want to do a heavy attack. Again, we want to do at least one heavy attack between every cast of Dark Deal. Otherwise, you just can't sustain a 6-man dummy parse here. Yeah, another heavy attack here. So now we have 4 global cooldowns to go through on the back bar, but we don't want to do that because then we end up losing our Advanced Yokeda uptime. So instead, we go to our front bar, we do. Okay, so here again, we have 4 global cooldowns with our ultimate. So after I do my 3, so that was a little bit weird there. But that's just kind of what you might need to do with the dynamic rotation. You might kind of need to improvise on the spot there. The idea behind this is you basically want to minimize your back bar uptime to only 4 abilities at a time. Or 3 abilities at a time, I should say. How you kind of allocate those 3 abilities is kind of up to you. But that's sort of the goal for your back bar. No more than 3 abilities. Again, minimize our time on the back bar to 3 abilities. there we go. That is the DPS that you can expect to see with a 6 million tummy parse self-buffed. So notice here that our physical pen is going to be lower. Again, we don't have major fracture, we don't have minor fracture, so DKs, pretty much any of the other classes do have a source of either major fracture or minor fracture, so templates get minor. The other three classes, DKs, Wardens, and Nightblades, get major, so that's why our parse is lower compared to those races there, other classes there. So 42.8k. I have a few other higher parses, so 43.4 is my personal highest here with the exact same sort of configuration here. So see here, Berserking Warrior, this is Advanced Yokeda. We need to have as much uptime as we can, so 89% uptime is pretty decent here. And if we take a look here at the Ravage Health Poisons, if we combine the two Ravage Health Poisons, we end up getting about 1400 DPS, which puts it just above Velidreth here. So this does end up doing more DPS compared to using a Poison Damage enchant with a Absorb Stamina enchant. We are giving up a little bit of sustain because we aren't able to run an Absorb Stamina enchant, but it's fine because we still would have needed to use one heavy attack every time we cast Dark Deal anyways, even with that Absorb Stamina enchant there. So that is pretty much it for this build video. If you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability here. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.